Love did not arrive in Valentina Bloodmoon's life as softness. It arrived as duty first, then companionship, then the quiet relief of being seen without being examined for strategic value. In pack politics, grief was rarely private and almost never sacred. Every loss became leverage, every womb a treaty, every widow a rumor waiting for a mouth. She had once believed the border den she shared with her bonded husband stood outside that machinery, too small to matter and too far from council roads to be noticed. That belief lasted until the night iron hooks struck their shutters and men wearing Ravencrest ash paint kicked in their door. She was 7 months along, heavy with twins, when her husband shoved her behind the grain chest and turned with a hunting blade in his hand. The room smelled of lamp oil, pine resin, and the metallic tang of fear. She remembered his voice more than the shouting, low and urgent, telling her to stay down, telling her not to make a sound. She disobeyed when she heard him cry out. The fight was fast, brutal in its clarity. Boots on wood, a table overturned. One raider slammed her husband into the hearthstones while another tore open the sleeping alcove, searching for records and blood seals. Valentina grabbed the first thing near her, a split log, and swung as hard as her body allowed. The log cracked against a jaw. A man cursed and backhanded her to the floor. She tasted salt and soot. One palm spread protectively across the curve of her belly before she could think about pain. Her husband was still breathing when she crawled to him. He pressed his blood-wet fingers into hers and mouthed her name like an apology. Then his grip went slack. No scream came. The silence that replaced it frightened her more. The raider captain crouched near her, wiped his knife on a torn curtain, and studied her with a merchant's calculation. Blood Moon heirs carry coin now, he said. Council wants clean lineage. Rival packs want leverage. Everybody wants your pups before they can stand. He nodded toward her husband's body as if discussing a broken cartwheel. That one chose badly. She held his gaze because lowering her eyes felt like surrender. You broke border law. He smiled without humor. Border law broke first. They took the den ledgers, her husband's signet, and every message seal they could find. One of them dragged her by the wrist to the doorway, then released her when the captain lifted 2 fingers. Leave her, he said. A widow runs faster with fear than with chains. When they were gone, smoke drifted through the wrecked room in thin gray ribbons. Valentina stayed kneeling beside her husband until dawn bled over the tree line and turned the snowmelt outside their threshold pink and gold. Her back locked with strain whenever she tried to rise. The twins shifted beneath her ribs, a rolling pressure that reminded her, with each breath, that she was not allowed to stop. By midday, she reached Blood Moon's nearest satellite hall with her husband's ring tied around her throat on a leather cord. 2 sentries blocked the archway before she crossed the carved threshold stone. She knew both men by name. Neither would meet her eyes. We request shelter and rights, she said, voice rasped raw. Raiders struck the border den. My mate is dead. The older sentry's jaw tightened. Orders changed at first light. From whom? Council relay. No unsanctioned entrance. Not even kin. She stared at him, waiting for the correction that never came. I am Blood Moon by oath and blood. My children are... Your children are disputed now. The younger sentry cut in, too quickly, as if repeating a line drilled into him. That is what the relay said. A tremor traveled through her hands. Disputed by who? He looked over his shoulder before answering. By those with more soldiers than we have. The older one finally spoke with a kind of weary shame. Go to the low farms, hide until this passes. This passes? The words scraped her throat. My husband is dead. And if you stay here, you may join him by dusk, he whispered. Please, leave before patrol rotation. We were told to deny you. We were not told to drag you back. She stepped backward 1 pace, then another, each movement deliberate so she would not collapse in front of them. Rejection had a sound. It was not a shout. It was a gate beam dropping into place while familiar faces looked away. For 2 days she moved between abandoned trapping huts and the edge of winter fields, sleeping in short, painful stretches with her back against stone and one hand on her belly. Hunger made everything sharp, the crackle of frost under boot leather, the scent of wet cedar, the distant call of carrion birds circling where she had left the border den. She could not return there. She could not stay where she was known. Every fire she lit risked signal smoke. On the third evening, old Marta from the mill found her behind a woodpile, wrapped in a horse blanket gone stiff with cold. Marta had once braided Valentina's hair for festivals. Now she glanced around before kneeling, fear and affection fighting in her face. They posted notices at all 6 crossings, Marta whispered, pressing dried meat and a water skin into her hands. Reward for information and transfer rights. Your name is on the list. So are the pups, though they wrote it as future issue to keep their hands clean. Valentina felt nausea rise, then settle into something harder. Who signed the notice? Marta swallowed. Ravencrest seal, counter-stamped with council wax. The betrayal was no longer rumor. It had paperwork. There is one road left, Marta said. Iron Pine Pass to the military outpost at Grey Hollow. They answer to the War Office, not council elders. If you can reach their healer barracks, they might take coin over politics. I have no coin. Marta touched the ring at Valentina's throat. Then take his name and your courage and pray, those still by mercy. That night became the breaking point because dawn brought hunters. She woke to hounds before she saw riders, the baying echoing through spruce trunks like torn cloth. Instinct narrowed the world to breath, footing, and distance. She packed nothing except the water skin, 2 strips of dried meat, and the ring. When she rose too quickly, pain knifed down her side, and she braced against a tree until it eased. Snowmelt had turned the trail to black mud, slick over hidden roots. She moved anyway, one hand steadying her belly as branches whipped her cheeks and shoulders. The first arrow struck bark inches from her ear. The second buried in moss by her boot. Valentina Bloodmoon, a voice called from behind, amplified by the pass walls. Stop and present for escort. You are requested at council hearing. Requested. The word almost made her laugh. She did not turn back. She cut off the marked trail and dropped into a narrow game run that braided between boulders too tight for horses. Hounds could follow scent, but riders would need to circle. Her lungs burned. Her calves shook. The twins kicked in startled rhythm, and she murmured to them between gasps, nonsense syllables and promises she was no longer sure she could keep. By late afternoon, the weather turned violent. Rain slashed sideways through the pines, flattening her braid against her neck and soaking her cloak until it dragged at her shoulders. Thunder rolled over Iron Pine like distant artillery. The storm erased many scents, including hers. It also erased the path. At a fork where both descents looked equally dangerous, she chose the route with wagon ruts half filled by runoff, gambling that roads led to walls and walls led to sentries. Twilight thickened to blue-black by the time she saw palisade torches through the rain. Grey Hollow Outpost rose from the valley floor in rough timber and iron bands, utilitarian and ugly, and, in that moment, more beautiful than any ceremonial hall. 2 gate guards lowered spears as she stumbled into the light. State your business, one barked. She straightened because collapsing would look like weakness, and weakness invited questions she had no strength to answer. Seeking barracks shelter under War Code, civilian widow, late term. The guard's gaze dropped to her belly, then to the Blood Moon ring. Suspicion sharpened his mouth. Blood Moon disputes are council territory. Not ours. A third man approached from the inner yard, his stride even despite a limp that favored his left leg. He wore a common soldier's dark leathers, weathered at the cuffs, with an old scar cutting from temple to jaw in a pale diagonal line. Rain beaded on his shoulders and ran off without hurry. His scent reached her through storm water and mud, cedar, rain, and moon iron. He took in her face, the ring, the mud to her knees, and whatever grief still clung to her skin like smoke. War Code Section 12, he said to the guards, voice quiet but edged with command. Pregnant refugees are triaged through healers first, jurisdiction arguments second. The first guard frowned. Captain, counsel could file sanction. Then counsel can file paperwork in dry clothes. He held Valentina's gaze, not pushing, not softening it into pity. Can you walk to the infirmary? She nodded once. He stepped beside her as the gates opened, close enough to steady if she faltered, careful not to touch without invitation. Name, he said. Valentina Bloodmoon. A beat passed. Alistair, he replied. Stay with me. No one questions you in the healer corridor unless I permit it. The rain hammered the roofs as he led her through the outpost yard, past staring soldiers and stacked crates, into a long stone barracks that smelled of broth, herbs, and clean linen. At the infirmary threshold, exhaustion finally broke her knees. Alistair caught her under the elbows before she hit the floor and lowered her onto a cot with practiced care. Only then, with stormlight flashing through the shutters and healers rushing in, did Valentina let herself believe she had outrun the men who wanted to turn her children into currency, at least for one night. At least for one night, she told herself, and then the night stretched wider than she expected, thick with lamplight and voices that did not yet belong to her, but did not push her away either. Healers cut her soaked cloak free, wrapped her in wool warmed by the stove, and pressed a cup of bitter willow bark tea into her hands. The infirmary had 20 cots in 2 straight rows, all occupied by soldiers with sprains, fever, or old training injuries. Yet the room held a practical quiet instead of chaos. No one asked her for bloodline papers. No one asked what reward might be collected by turning her in. A gray-haired healer with split-knuckle hands listened to the twins' heartbeats, nodded once, and said, "Strong. Agitated, but strong," before ordering a corner screen erected for privacy. Valentina lay back against rough pillows and stared at the ceiling beams while rain battered the shutters in relentless bursts. Her body shuddered as heat returned to her fingers. Her mind would not settle. Every corridor footstep became a threat. Every hushed voice became negotiation. She kept one palm over the ring at her throat and the other over the curve of her abdomen, measuring each movement beneath her skin like a vow she had to renew with every breath. When Alistair reappeared, he had changed into a dry tunic but still wore his sword belt. The scar along his face looked older in the lamplight, not harsh so much as lived in, as if it had become part of the map of him. He stopped outside the privacy screen and waited. "May I come in?" The courtesy startled her more than a shouted command would have. She nodded. He stepped inside, carrying a wooden tray with broth, bread, and a small bowl of crushed berries. "Healer's orders," he said. "You eat, you sleep. If anyone tries to remove you without my word, you call for me." "You would hear me in this storm?" His mouth shifted. Almost a smile. Almost not. "I have heard worse weather and louder liars." She drank the broth because her body demanded it, then looked at him over the rim of the cup. "Who do you actually answer to, Captain? The guards at the gate seemed afraid of council sanctions. You did not." For the first time, he glanced toward the infirmary doors before replying. Grey Hollow is a frontier garrison on paper. In practice, it is Crown land held under old war charter. Council elders can complain, they cannot command. Crown land. Her pulse climbed. Ravencrest Crown? Not Marcus Ravencrest, he said, and something sharpened beneath the quiet tone, like steel drawn without sound. Remember that distinction. A cough from the next cot, the scrape of boots, The distant howl of sentry wolves changing watch carried through the barracks. She listened more carefully then, aware of details fear had blurred on her way in. Paired patrol routes, rune-burned iron hooks over every door, and the crest carved above the infirmary arch, half worn by weather yet still visible when lightning flared. Not Ravencrest's branching talon. A different sigil entirely, a crescent crossed by 3 vertical marks. By the time midnight thinned toward its coldest hour, the storm had shifted east, but the pressure in her lower back had become rhythmic and wrong. Not ordinary strain, not a single cramp. A wave that rose, held, and broke, then returned again with brutal precision. The healer came at once, hand firm on her shoulder. "Too early," she muttered, checking Valentina's pulse, then her belly. "Not ideal, but we do not bargain with timing." "Captain." Alistair was there before the second call ended. The healer pointed to the corridor. "Boil water, fetch clean linens from the locked chest, and send for Mara from the south ward." He moved immediately. No argument, no brittle pride at being ordered. Valentina watched him disappear and reappear through the screen opening with armfuls of cloth, steam rising from the bucket he carried, rain still dripping from his hairline where he must have crossed the yard. Soldiers in nearby cots turned to the wall to grant privacy. One young private set his own blanket over the screen pole to close a gap where drafts pushed through. These were his people, she realized with a strange, aching clarity. Hard men and women shaped by marches and losses, yet they made space for her without spectacle. No one called her cursed. No one called her disputed issue. Another contraction tore through her, and she gripped the cot rail until her knuckles whitened. "I am still here," she thought, present tense and stubborn, because thinking in the present was the only way to survive the next minute. "I am in this room, on this bed, with breath in my lungs and my children alive under my hands. I am not in the border den. I am not kneeling in ash. I do not owe my fear obedience. If the world wants my pups as bargaining pieces, it will have to take me apart in front of witnesses, and I am not easy wood to split. Look at me," Alistair said softly from beside the screen, not crossing into the healer's space but close enough that she could track his voice. "Breathe with the count. 4 in, 4 out." She obeyed because command wrapped in steadiness felt like an anchor, not control. Through the next wave she fixed on the scuffed leather of his bracer, on the tendon in his wrist flexing as he held the water bucket steady, on the simple fact that he stayed. The first twin came just before dawn, small, furious, and loud enough to fill the whole infirmary with life. The second followed minutes later, weaker cry at first, then stronger when laid skin to skin against her. Valentina wept without sound as she counted fingers, toes, and breaths, touching each damp, dark head in reverent disbelief. Mara, the second healer, cleaned and wrapped them, then paused. "Captain," she said, unusually careful, "you should see this." Alistair stepped closer. On each infant's chest, just over the heart, lay a faint raven-shaped mark, dark and precise as though painted by deliberate hand. Not a bruise, not a birth stain she recognized from blood moon lines. Identical on both children. The room seemed to tilt. Valentina looked from the marks to Alistair's face. He had gone very still. "Those are not blood moon sigils," she whispered. "No," he said. Another silence opened, taut as drawn wire. Then, with deliberate motion, he unstrapped the leather guard from his right forearm and pushed back his sleeve. Branded into his skin, old and unmistakable, was the same raven form threaded through with the crescent and 3 cuts she had seen over the infirmary arch. Tension snapped into recognition so suddenly she felt it as a physical force, a hot silver line pulling tight beneath her ribs. Heat pulsed under her skin. Awareness prickled along her spine. The scent of cedar, rain, and moon iron surged through every breath, until it seemed less like air and more like claim, like answer, like the end of a question she had been asking in the dark without words. Alistair took a sharp breath, as if struck. Amber bled into his irises, brightening, then deepening toward molten gold. His pupils narrowed. The disciplined soldier's composure cracked for one exposed heartbeat before he rebuilt it by sheer will. Valentina's animal instincts went rigid, not in fear alone but in recognition so profound it threatened to unmake her. Desire and grief collided inside her chest with enough force to leave her shaking. She had loved once. She had buried that love with her own hands. She had carried memory like penance. Wanting again felt like disloyalty, yet denying what flared now felt like lying to her own blood. "No," she whispered, but the word had no conviction. Alistair dropped to one knee beside the cot, bringing himself level with the swaddled twins rather than looming over her. His voice came roughened, unguarded. "I know. I know this is the worst possible moment." He looked at the marks again, then back to her. "But I will not pretend I do not feel it." The healer glanced between them, caught the shift, and quietly ushered the nearest soldiers farther down the ward. Privacy settled like another curtain. Valentina could not look away. The bond held her there, eyes locked to his, reading things language could not carry. Restraint, hunger, devotion already taking shape where no promise had yet been spoken. She hated how much relief lived inside that recognition. She hated that relief, and needed it anyway. "My husband died tonight," she said, voice breaking on the lie of tense because grief had collapsed time. "In me, it is still tonight." Alistair bowed his head once, a gesture of respect so complete it eased something tight behind her ribs. "Then we honor him by keeping you and these children alive when dawn comes again." "Why?" The question escaped before she could temper it. "Why would you risk sanction, war, whatever comes after this?" He reached toward the edge of the blanket, stopped short of touching, and let his hand rest on the mattress where she could choose the distance. "Because you are not leverage to me. Because they are not symbols to me. Because the first time I saw you at that gate, every instinct I trust told me my life had just been divided into before and after." The words landed like thunder far off, then closer. Outside, the storm finally broke into light rain. Inside, her newborn son made a small protesting sound until Alistair offered one finger. Tiny claws, not yet fully sheathed, caught his skin and held. He did not flinch. Valentina watched the impossible tenderness of that moment and felt her defenses, built from ash and betrayal and sheer survival, begin to fracture at the edges. Not gone, not surrendered, but no longer seamless. "What are their names?" he asked, still kneeling, still giving her the lead. She looked down at the twins, then back at the man whose mark they carried and whose gaze had gone fierce with protectiveness rather than ownership. Her pulse steadied by degrees. Her fear did not vanish, but it made room for one thin strand of trust. "Lucian," she said, touching the first raven mark. "And Lyra." Alistair repeated the names as if swearing an oath. When he lifted his eyes to hers again, the gold had not faded. The pull between them held, bright and undeniable, while dawn seeped pale through the shutters and turned one night of refuge into the first morning of a war neither of them could avoid any more. The pull between them held, bright and undeniable, while dawn seeped pale through the shutters and turned one night of refuge into the first morning of a war neither of them could avoid any more, and the war arrived faster than either of them expected. A horn sounded from the outer yard, one long note, too short. Not an attack alarm. Authority at the gate. Mara swore under her breath and crossed to the screen opening. A young runner in soaked boots waited there, chest heaving. "Council courier," he said. "Stamped transfer writ. They are demanding custody of the Blood Moon widow and both heirs under dispute protocol. Valentina's body tightened around the twins on instinct. She had delivered them hours ago and still felt hollowed out. Raw, stitched together by will and linen wraps. How long do we have? Until they bring more signatures, Alistair said. He had not moved, yet command settled over the room with quiet force. Which means we have less than an hour before they stop pretending this is paperwork. He turned to her, and his expression shifted from soldier hard to something steadier, more careful. I can hide you in the armory tunnels and claim no such patients entered the ward. I can also move you under field triage exemption to a charter safe house beyond council roads. The first is safer for today. The second is better for the next month. You choose. No pressure in his tone, no claim disguised as protection. He was giving her authority while her hands still shook. I choose movement, she said. Then movement it is. He gave orders in a clipped cadence that wasted nothing. Fresh wraps, nurse cart harnessed as if for herb resupply. 2 trusted scouts in plain cloaks. Mara would ride with them until the first relay barn. Every step felt rehearsed, as though he had planned for this exact morning since the night he met her in the rain. Valentina watched him and felt bewilderment thread through fear. Bond recognition had struck like fire. He could have used it now, could have stood at her bedside and invoked destiny and urgency and the children's marks to push her into whatever he wanted. Instead, he folded blankets, checked straps, adjusted the twins' swaddles with the same practical gentleness he gave to wounded soldiers, and asked permission each time his hands neared her. When he lifted Lucian to settle him beside Lyra in the padded travel basket, his knuckles brushed Valentina's wrist. Heat moved through her in a swift, disorienting wave. He froze at once and stepped back. Sorry, he said, voice low. I should have warned you. She stared at him. You apologized. I touched you without asking. Most men of rank would have laughed at that distinction. He treated it like law. By the time they rolled out through the east service gate, council riders were visible on the ridge road, dark shapes against thinning clouds. Gray Hollow's timber walls fell behind them, pine trunks closed in. Wheel ruts swallowed rainwater and jolted the cart hard enough that Valentina bit down on pain and kept her breathing even. Alistair rode on the left flank, hood up, hand near his sword, but never on it unless the trail narrowed. By nightfall, they reached an abandoned charcoal keeper's lodge cut into a fold of rock above a frozen stream. 1 room, iron stove, 1 bed and 1 bench. Mara left with the scouts to draw any tail toward the southern ford, promising to rejoin at first light with milk and clean cloths. When the door shut and silence settled, Valentina felt the true weight of the day crash over her. Her limbs trembled. Her scarred memories sharpened at the edges. The border den. Boot steps. Her husband's hand going slack. She sat on the bed with the twins against her chest and told herself to stay present, 1 breath at a time. I am here. I am upright. I have both children in my arms. No one is dragging us across a threshold. The lock is set. The stove is lit. I can hear wind, not hounds. I can hear him moving in the next room, not raiders kicking through cabinets. I do not have to trust the whole future tonight. I only have to decide the next 10 breaths. A thin cry broke from Lucian just after midnight, sharp and frightened, and then Lyra answered with a wail of her own. Thunder rolled over the ridge, and Lucian's tiny hands spasmed open. His nails lengthened, darkening into brief, curved points, the involuntary edge of a wolf trait too early and too wild. He clawed at the blanket, panic feeding panic. Valentina tried to soothe him, but exhaustion made her clumsy. Easy, love, easy, she whispered, tears stinging without warning. Please, please come back down. The inner door opened a handspan. Alistair stayed on the threshold. Do you want me in? She could not quite manage pride over need. Yes. He came only as far as the floor by the bed and sat cross-legged, making himself smaller. No reach for the child, no assumption, just presence. He began humming under his breath, an old pack lullaby in a minor key, steady as heartbeat and warm as banked coals. Lucian's cries hitched. Lyra quieted enough to listen. "May I offer him my finger?" Alistair asked. Valentina nodded. He extended one hand slowly. Lucian latched on with surprising strength, tiny claw tips pressing into Alistair's skin. Alistair did not wince. He kept humming, gaze on the child, voice roughened by tenderness he made no effort to hide. Over several breaths, Lucian's claws softened and withdrew. His fist remained curled around Alistair's finger long after sleep reclaimed him. Valentina exhaled like someone surfacing from deep water. "I am sorry," she whispered. "I brought trouble to your door." Alistair looked up then, and reverence moved across his face so plainly it undid her. "You brought me my family." The words landed with a force gentler than impact and no less absolute. Lyra squirmed and fussed. Alistair cleared his throat. "I can patrol outside if you need rest." "Stay," Valentina heard herself say. He stayed. An hour later, when both twins drifted in and out of milk-heavy sleep, he attempted a bedtime story at her hesitant request and failed in a way so earnest it startled laughter out of her before she could stop it. "In the Eastern Borough," he began, deeply serious, "Captain Rabbit assembled 3rd Carrot Battalion for dawn maneuvers." Valentina blinked at him. "Third what?" He grimaced. "I have limited narrative range." She pressed her lips together, shoulders shaking. "Go on, Captain." He did, assigning scouting duties to Lieutenant Clover and supply management to Quartermaster Hare, until even tiny Lyra made breathy, hiccuping sounds that resembled laughter more than fussing. Lucian flailed one drowsy hand in the air as if saluting. The lodge, for a brief and fragile stretch, sounded like a home. When the twins finally slept, Alistair moved toward the door. "Why are you always stopping?" she asked quietly. "At the gate, in the barracks. Here, you feel this bond and still you stop." He rested his hand on the latch, but did not leave. "Because restraint is the only way power stays clean." A pause. "My father took what he wanted and called it duty. I buried too many apologies that could not fix what was done. I swore I would never build my life on someone else's surrender, even if the moon itself handed me permission." She held his gaze in the low firelight, seeing not distance but discipline chosen at cost. He added, "When you ask, I will come closer. Not before." After he closed the door behind him, Valentina lay awake for a long time, listening to the wind move through pines and the twins' small synchronized breaths, feeling a wall she had carried like armor begin, quietly, to loosen. Morning came hard and bright, the storm scrubbed from the sky. They descended from the lodge by mule track and merged into caravan traffic on the old trade road. Valentina bundled in plain wool, twins hidden beneath a patched travel shawl. Alistair walked beside the cart instead of riding ahead, visible enough to deter opportunists, ordinary enough not to draw immediate challenge. By the second dusk, the neutral trading fort at Red Quarry rose from the valley floor in layered timber rings and smokestacks, loud with barter cries, blacksmith hammers, and the rank sense of too many packs pretending neutrality while counting each other's weaknesses. No banner flew above the gate, only the fort mark of crossed antlers on stone, meaning law was coin and witnesses. They had nearly reached the inner courtyard when 3 wolves in slate-gray cloaks blocked the lane. Their leader wore allied crest pins from a minor mountain pack Valentina recognized by color if not name. His gaze slid over her shawl, lingered on the twins' basket, then cut to Alistair with open contempt. "So it is true," he drawled. "The widow carries 2 cents in one line and calls it fate. Council was right to question legitimacy." The words hit old bruises with surgical precision. Market noise dimmed around her as nearby traders turned to listen. Alistair stepped half a pace forward, not shielding her from sight, just aligning himself between her and the man's reach. Stand aside. The gray cloak smiled. Neutral ground means neutral hands, Captain. No one hides disputed pups here. He reached for Valentina's arm. Alistair moved once. Fast, economical, precise. He caught the man's wrist, turned, and broke it with a single controlled motion that snapped through the courtyard like split kindling. The man dropped to his knees with a strangled cry, clutching his forearm. No flourish, no roar, just consequence. Alistair stripped off his own heavy cloak and set it around Valentina's shoulders, fastening the clasp at her throat with hands that remained steady. Then he faced the watching crowd and spoke in a voice that carried to the outer ring. Under War Charter and Sovereign Blood Oath, I place Valentina Bloodmoon and her children under my personal sanctuary. Any hand laid on them without consent is a hand laid against me. Touch her again, lose the hand. Silence spread in widening circles. A few elders near the grain stalls exchanged sharp looks. 2 guards approached, halberds raised uncertainly. One of them said, "You cannot declare sanctuary here without rank disclosure." Alistair held the guard's gaze. "Then record this disclosure." He pushed back his sleeve, revealing the Raven Crescent royal glyph branded on his forearm, gold catching the torchlight as if answering an old call. Alistair Ravencrest, blood claimant under Crown Charter. File your protest to my seal. Shock moved through the courtyard like a pressure wave. Knees bent in uneven sequence, heads lowered. Even those who disliked him now had to reckon with law older than their grudges. Valentina felt every stare on her skin. Shame had stalked her for years in anticipation, a trap she had learned to fear almost more than blades. Yet standing there with his cloak around her shoulders, she saw the shape of his protection clearly at last. Not possession, not performance. A boundary drawn with legal precision and teeth only when required. The injured wolf spat curses from the dirt. Alistair did not look at him again. He looked at Valentina. "Your decision," he said quietly, giving her the center even now. "We can leave and avoid a scene, or we can stay, register sanctuary formally, and force every rumor into written record where it can be challenged." She could have stepped behind him. Every frightened instinct urged it. Instead, she shifted forward until they stood shoulder to shoulder. "We stay," she said. She lifted her chin and addressed the nearest scribe table herself. "Record that I, Valentina Bloodmoon, accept sanctuary under Crown Oath. Record also that any accusation against my children will be answered before witnesses and sent truth, not market gossip." Ink scratched parchment. The words became document. Document became protection. Later, in the rented upper room above the cooper's shop, while the twins slept in a basket between them and the fort lamps burned low beyond shutter slats, Valentina found Alistair by the window checking sightlines out of old habit. She moved to stand beside him, close enough that their sleeves brushed. This time, she did not step away. "I am still afraid," she said. "I know. But I am less alone in it." His breath caught just once. When she offered her hand, he took it carefully, as if accepting an oath rather than a gift, and for the first time since the border den burned, lowering her guard felt less like surrender and more like choosing where to build. Choosing where to build lasted exactly until knuckles struck the door 3 times in a courier's code Alistair had taught his scouts years ago. He released her hand at once and crossed the room with the quiet speed of a man who expected bad news and planned for it anyway. Mara entered in travel leathers dusted white with road frost, a leather tube strapped across her back, and anger tightening her mouth. "I did not come through the front ledger," she said. "Your name is being watched there." Alistair barred the door again. Report. Mara pulled 3 folded sheets and a wax-wrapped bundle from the tube, laying them on the table between the lamp and the twins' basket. Intercepted at South Marker. Council courier, 2 outriders, 1 dead in a ditch by the time we found him. Papers were headed for Moon Tribunal intake, all stamped Ravencrest and counter-sealed by 2 council elders. Valentina stepped closer, pulse rising as Alistair opened the first sheet. The decree named her by full bloodline and listed Lucian and Lyra as disputed offspring pending blood denial review. The second order authorized protective removal of the children into temporary crown wardship. The third carried an execution clause for fraud against pack succession if denial ritual confirmed deceit. Her fingers went cold. They wrote the verdict before the hearing. They wrote a script, Alistair said, scanning signatures, and they expect the packs to read it as law. He unwrapped the bundle. Inside sat a signet mold carved in soft black soapstone, the Ravencrest branch pattern shallow and slightly wrong at the talon joint. Forgery kit. Deliberate. Not rumor anymore. Mara nodded once. Our dead courier had this sewn into his saddle lining. Also this. She offered a narrow strip of vellum with a shaking handprint at the bottom, witness marked by a clerk who had no seal left to lose. It named Marcus Ravencrest as issuer of falsified decrees and tied him to the deaths of 2 bonded heirs who had opposed his emergency claim. The room seemed to contract around a single name. Valentina had heard Marcus described in a dozen ways by people who wanted to sound brave after leaving his territory. Strategic, necessary, severe. She had never heard merciful. He wants the tribunal ring, she said. He wants me condemned where everyone can watch. And he wants our children relabeled as omens. Alistair's jaw flexed. He wants more than that. He wants my line broken in public so no pack will rally when I stand under Crown Charter. He met her eyes, no concealment left. Marcus is my elder cousin. He was regent after my father died. He learned early that fear signs faster than trust. The lamp flame hissed in a draft. Lucian shifted in his sleep, then settled when Lyra's hand found his blanket edge. Valentina looked at the twins and then at the forged orders again, feeling the old reflex to run rise hard in her chest. Run before they mark the door. Run before they make a cage sound procedural. I am standing in a locked room with my children breathing beside me, and panic is trying to rename this as the night everything ends. It is not the end. It is information. It is a map. Marcus wants me isolated, ashamed, and silent because those are cheaper than soldiers. He wants Alistair provoked into claiming by force so he can call it tyranny. I cannot outshout a forged decree, but I can refuse to disappear inside it. Fear says hide. Grief says freeze. I say choose. I say one decision, then the next, until dawn belongs to us. Alistair slid the documents into 2 stacks, practical even in fury. 1 set goes to the neutral registrar downstairs tonight. 1 goes by Fast Rider to Grey Hollow Vault under Healer's seal. If either packet vanishes, we still have chain of custody. Mara was already tying the duplicates. I will put my signature beside yours. Do it, he said, and wake Soren at the gate. No one enters this floor unsearched. By second bell after midnight, the papers had been logged in the fort's iron-bound record chest with 6 witnesses present, including 2 traitors who disliked both Ravencrest branches and, therefore, could be trusted to hate everyone equally. The safeguard was inelegant, but it was real. Evidence now lived outside their hands. The next morning opened brittle and clear, smoke lifting straight from the chimneys into a hard blue sky. Red Quarry looked almost ordinary from the window. Mule trains clattering in, hawkers arguing over salt blocks, apprentices hauling casks toward the tannery lane. Then the notices went up. Pinned to gateposts and grain stalls, each broadside carried Marcus's seal and charged Valentina with seducing officers for sanctuary, falsifying lineage, and corrupting succession by mixing contested blood. The language was polished enough to sound official and cruel enough to travel quickly. People read, glanced toward the Cooper's stair, and pretended not to. Alistair returned from the lower courtyard with one of the broadsides crushed in his fist. He is moving faster than I projected. Moon Tribunal convenes in 5 nights, not 9. 5, she repeated, tasting iron at the back of her throat. He is forcing a compressed docket. Fewer witnesses. More confusion. Alistair spread a map over the table and weighted the corners with cups. If we leave by dusk, we can reach Highcairn on the 3rd night and demand full scent test testimony before the ring closes. And if we do not, he files default and names you absent deceiver. The attraction between them had become its own pressure system, always present beneath strategy and fatigue. A low thrum that intensified in narrow spaces and quiet pauses. It did not feel delicate. It felt structural, as if their lives had already begun aligning along a line neither fully controlled. Yet each time they brushed near it, he waited for her cue. And each time she noticed, trust deepened into something more dangerous than yearning because it asked for belief. When Lyra began fussing, Alistair reached for the kettle, warmed milk with healer precision, and tested it on his wrist before handing the cup to Valentina. Their fingers touched at the handle. Amber bled through his irises for a heartbeat, predator and protector surfacing together. He inhaled once, steadying. Too hot, he murmured, adjusting the cup. Now. It was such a small thing that it undid her more than declarations ever could. By late afternoon, replies to Alistair's calls for Allied escort began arriving, and the pattern was as grim as Marcus had intended. One Mountain Alpha sent formal regret and no wolves. A River Pack chief answered with legal caution, refusing to appear until tribunal evidence was less socially volatile. A third returned no message at all, which in pack politics meant fear had already voted. Pressure mounted in layers, the posted slander, the shortening tribunal clock, the thinning list of friends willing to be seen helping them. Even Red Quarry's neutral master sent word through a clerk that sanctuary rooms would be honored for one more night only. After moonrise, the fort would enforce external writs to preserve trade status. We should move the twins to Mara now, Valentina said. Alistair nodded. Agreed. They sleep in the lower healer cellar tonight with 2 sworn guards and no posted roster. No drama accompanied the transfer. Mara wrapped both children against the chill, kissed Valentina's temple, and carried them down the back stair while Soren locked each landing behind her. Safe, shielded, unseen. Valentina stood at the corridor bend until she heard the final bolt slide and let herself exhale. Dusk thickened. Hooves sounded in the outer yard. Too many, too synchronized for merchants. Soren came up the stairs at a run. Tribunal bailiffs at the west gate. 12 riders, moonstone tabs, docket chest, and arrest writ for Valentina Bloodmoon. They claim emergency authority. Alistair's expression went flat with calculation. Show me the writ. Soren handed over a rolled parchment sealed in blue wax. The script looked legitimate at first glance, the legal phrases exact, the signature line crowded with council names. Then Valentina saw the same flaw as on the forged mold, a slight angle error in the Ravencrest talon. She looked up. It is him. Alistair nodded once. Marcus is testing whether Red Quarry will choose paperwork over people. From below came the thud of gates opening, then the amplified call of a herald demanding compliance. No one shouted back. Market noise had died. The fort was listening. Alistair turned to Valentina. We still have options. Hidden rope stair from the Cooper roof to the ash yard, then east drain culvert. We can be outside the wall in 4 minutes. She held his gaze, feeling fear and fury braid tighter under her ribs. And tomorrow he posts that I fled lawful hearing. Yes. And then every neutral pack says the same thing. If she were honest, she would have stood. Yes. Silence stretched, full of cost. She stepped toward the table, flattened the forged writ with both palms, and looked at Soren. Bring the fort master here. In public. I want witnesses before anyone touches me. Soren hesitated only long enough to read Alistair's face, then ran. What followed moved with the strange clarity of impending violence. Torches were lit in the central courtyard. Traders, guards, and teamsters gathered in rings 3 deep. The 12 so-called bailiffs waited mounted by the well, cloaks dark, helmets low, moonstone tabs glinting at their collars. Their captain sat too straight, as if posture could hide intent. The fort master arrived with 2 clerks and visible dread. State your claim, he told the riders. The bailiff captain unrolled his docket and read in polished cadence. By decree of Moon Tribunal Emergency Session, we take custody of Valentina Bloodmoon for immediate transfer and isolation. Children to be surrendered upon secured arrival. Resistance constitutes treason. Murmurs broke across the crowd. Alistair stepped forward, voice carrying without strain. Produce your oath names. The captain listed 12. Alistair listened, then spoke 5 words that shifted the night. 2 of those men are dead. The captain's hand moved toward his sword. Valentina felt the instant the facade broke. No warning flare, no dramatic confession, only trained killers deciding theater was over. The first rider kicked his horse forward toward the stair where she stood. A second drew a compact crossbow from under his cloak and aimed not at her, but at Alistair's throat. Action snapped open. Alistair shoved the fort master aside and drew in one motion, steel ringing against steel as he intercepted the rider at the horse's shoulder. Soren slammed into the crossbowman before he could fire, bolts skittering into a barrel instead of flesh. 2 more impostors dismounted and drove toward the stairwell in coordinated silence, blades short and curved for close quarters. Valentina did not retreat. She seized a drop torch from the cobbles and swung the burning end into the lead attacker's forearm, forcing him back long enough for a guard to tackle him at the knees. Heat roared up her wrist. Smoke and horse breath and iron filled the air. "Cellar door!" Alistair shouted without looking at her. "Now!" She pivoted toward the side passage that led below, boots slipping once on wet stone, then caught herself on the wall and ran. Behind her, the courtyard erupted into impact sounds, shouted orders, the crack of wood, the grunt of bodies meeting force. She reached the cellar corridor and found Mara already there with both twins in her arms, eyes wide but steady. "Rear tunnel is blocked," Mara said. 3 masked men came through the grain hatch. We barred them in the anteroom, but the beam will not hold long. From the staircase above came a heavy slam, then another, splinters raining down the steps. Valentina took Lucian from Mara and pressed Lyra back into her arms, making the decision as the 3rd slam hit. "There is no exit left, is there?" Mara's silence was answer enough. Overhead, a voice she did not recognize called through the breaking door, cold and almost amused. "Alive, if convenient. The widow first." The beam cracked. The cellar shook. The night went critical. The beam cracked, the cellar shook, and the night went critical. Wood split inward with a sound like thunder trapped in a box. The bar snapped. 3 masked men forced the door wide enough to pour through, blades low, shoulders armored in dark leather marked with tribunal moonstone tabs that gleamed too clean to be earned. Behind them, framed by stairlight and drifting splinters, stood the herald captain from the yard with his helmet removed at last. Marcus Ravencrest's face was older than the painted notices and colder than the stories. Silver threaded his black hair at the temples, his mouth carved into a patient cruelty that had learned to masquerade as law. He did not hurry. He let the sight of him do the work first. "Valentina Bloodmoon," he said, as if announcing docket order in a council hall. "You have exhausted all polite avenues. Give me the children, and I will see you die quickly and without spectacle." Mara shifted her stance with Lyra in her arms and Lucian shielded behind her shoulder, back pressed to the cider cask rack at the far wall. You will not touch them. Marcus barely glanced at her. You are a healer. Keep breathing and stay useful. Valentina felt fear rise like ice water and settle into something cleaner. The room narrowed to measurable facts. 4 attackers in immediate range, 1 choke point at the stair, no rear tunnel, loose tools on the Cooper bench, lamp oil near the grain bins, and Mara bracing 2 children who could not be part of this fight. She took 1 step sideways, placing herself between Marcus and the casks. You forged tribunal writs, she said, voice steady enough to surprise her. 2 of the oath names on your docket are dead men. You came without lawful witnesses. Marcus smiled with no warmth in it. Law is whatever survives the night. A heavy impact sounded above them, then another, then Soren shouting orders that dissolved into steel on steel. Alistair was still fighting in the courtyard. The attackers in the cellar heard it too and tightened, impatient now. Marcus lifted 2 fingers. The first masked man lunged for Mara. Valentina moved at the same instant, not toward safety but toward the Cooper bench. Her hand closed around the long moonsteel shaping rod used to set barrel hoops, lighter than a spear but balanced enough to thrust. She slammed its shaft into the attacker's forearm, knocking his blade wide, then drove the butt end into his sternum. He stumbled backward into a stack of grain sacks and went down hard. The second attacker came in from her right with a hooked knife meant for control, not killing. She pivoted, taking the cut along her sleeve instead of her skin, and kicked the low stool into his knees. He cursed, dropped to 1 leg, and reached again. Hold them, Marcus snapped. Do not mark the children. That command told her everything she needed. He wanted proof alive. He wanted ceremony. He wanted her broken in public later. Tonight was extraction. The third attacker drew a compact crossbow and sighted over the first 2 bodies, straight at Valentina's chest. She lifted her left hand on instinct, palm out, blood from a reopened stitch tracing her wrist. The bolt fired. Silver light flared from her skin in a crescent burst so brief it looked like lightning caught under water. The bolt struck the arc and disintegrated into gray dust that hissed onto the cellar floor. For 1 stunned heartbeat, nobody moved. Marcus's gaze sharpened, predator intent unmasked. So it is true, he murmured. Blood Moon kept that gift hidden. Valentina's pulse hammered. The power had not felt like choice at first, only necessity. Now it gathered again, a low thrum beneath her ribs, answering fear with structure. She set her feet, moonsteel rod angled across her body, and spoke to Mara without looking away from Marcus. Left alcove, behind the salt bins. Stay there until I call your name. Mara did not argue. She moved fast and silent, carrying both twins into the recess where stacked sacks made a narrow shielded pocket. Lucian began to whimper. Lyra pressed 1 small hand flat against Mara's collar and went still, eyes wide but dry. Marcus stepped down 1 stair into the cellar proper. You think this changes the ending, it only changes the method. It changes the witnesses, Valentina said. You came to steal in shadow. You will leave named. He made a tiny gesture, and the 2 men still standing advanced together. The fight collapsed into close quarters, breath and heat and impact. Valentina parried high, ducked low, used barrel stacks as moving walls. 1 knife skimmed her shoulder, another sliced her braid loose. She jammed the moonsteel rod under a wrist, twisted until bone creaked, then shoved hard enough to send the man into the lamppost. Flame guttered, climbed, caught spilled spirits on the floor in a fast blue run. Smoke thickened. Someone coughed. Above, the courtyard battle shifted toward the cellar stair, boots pounding in descending waves. Marcus did not help his men. He watched her with clinical interest, learning her timing. When the first attacker regained his feet and rushed the salt alcove, Valentina made the only choice that left no space for regret. She cut her palm fully on the moonsteel edge, pressed blood to the stone threshold, and called in the old blood moon tongue she had not spoken since girlhood rites. By blood witnessed and blood remembered, I invoke truth sent under contested claim. Let liars choke on their own names. The cellar air changed. Not colder, not warmer, but denser, like storm pressure bearing down. Her blood on the stone flashed silver white and spread in thin branching lines across the floor between casks and stair. The masked man nearest the alcove staggered, clawed at his throat, and tore off his face wrap, gasping. "Do not!" Marcus barked. Too late. The man wheezed out words between heaves. Jarek Flint, Ravencrest Ironsworn, not tribunal. The second one doubled over and vomited into the straw. Pell Dorn, he choked, no tribunal oath. From the stair came Alistair's voice, raw and furious. Valentina! Cellar, she shouted back. Alive and holding. Alistair hit the bottom step with Soren at his shoulder, both bloodied, both moving like men with no spare breath. Alistair took in the scene in a single sweep. Mara and the twins hidden left, 2 attackers compromised, Marcus on the third stair, Valentina standing in a web of silver truth lines with blood on her hand and steel in her grip. His eyes went feral for an instant, then focused. Marcus drew at last, a long curved blade with tribunal etchings stolen for theater. Cousin, he said, almost conversational. You are late to your own correction. Alistair advanced 1 pace. You forged decrees, murdered oath-bonded heirs, and attacked neutral ground under false law. Marcus gave a small shrug. I preserved order while you played soldier in border mud. Valentina moved to Alistair's flank instead of behind him. The choice landed between all 3 men like a struck bell. Marcus noticed. His contempt sharpened into anger. She was always useful bait, he said. You could have had the throne cleanly if you had left her in the ditch where politics put her. Valentina answered him first, voice clear through smoke. I am not your bait. I am your witness. Marcus lunged. Alistair met him steel to steel, the clash ringing hard enough to shake dust from the rafters. Their styles diverged at once. Marcus cut for speed and maiming angles, Alistair for control and disarm. Soren intercepted Jarek as the Ironsworn tried to crawl toward the alcove. Mara stayed braced over the twins, eyes locked on Valentina. The duel drove across the cellar in tight arcs, boots slipping on spilled spirits and ash. Marcus feinted high, slashed low, clipped Alistair's thigh, and smiled when he saw blood. Still favoring the old injury, he taunted. Predictable. Alistair's reply came through clenched focus, still mistaking cruelty for strategy. Marcus spun toward Valentina with sudden intent, abandoning form for opportunity. If he could seize her throat, the fight ended differently. Valentina had been waiting for that pivot. She stepped inside his reach and drove the moonsteel rod forward with both hands. The point punched through leather at his shoulder and slammed him into the stair post, pinning him there at an angle that stole leverage from his sword arm. Marcus roared, more outrage than pain, and struck at her face with his free hand. Alistair caught that wrist mid-swing and twisted until the blade dropped from numb fingers. It hit stone and skidded into the silver truth lines, where it smoked and blackened. Yield and confess, Alistair said, holding Marcus locked. Name the elders who countersigned your fraud, and I will grant tribunal death instead of traitor death. Marcus bared his teeth. Mercy is weakness. Valentina stepped closer, blood still dripping from her palm to the lit lines at her feet. No, she said softly. Mercy is choice. You never had the strength for it. He spat at her boots and made one final move, not at either of them but toward the small satchel tied beneath his belt. Valentina saw the fuse cord a breath ahead of Alistair. Fire powder, packed for collapse, enough to bring half the cellar down over Mara and the twins. Satchel, she shouted. Alistair ripped it free and hurled it into the empty brine trough at the far wall. Valentina threw up her hand again, silver shield snapping out in a curved wall between the trough and the alcove, just as the charge ignited. The blast hit her barrier with a concussive crack, showering stone chips and sparks that died against the light instead of tearing through flesh. When the smoke thinned, Marcus hung pinned and disarmed, his men face down under Soren's knee and a fort guard's halberd. The courtyard above had fallen silent except for horses stamping and someone crying out for a healer. The fort master appeared at the stair with both clerks and 6 armed witnesses, faces gray with shock. He stared at Marcus, then at the false moonstone tabs scattered across the floor, then at the silver lines still bright around Valentina's feet. "Record," Valentina said, breathing hard but upright. "Record that Marcus Ravencrest attacked under forged tribunal authority on neutral ground, with sworn impostors and an explosive charge, record names." One clerk's pen trembled. The other found his voice and read as he wrote, each word turning panic into record, record into law. Marcus laughed once, ragged and bitter. "Write whatever comforts you. High Cairn still wants a spectacle." Alistair took the moonsteel rod from Valentina's grip and left it through Marcus's shoulder, pinning him fast for transport, not death. "Then we give them one," he said, "in the ring, in daylight, with every lie stripped first." Marcus's gaze slid to Valentina, hatred naked now. "They will tear you apart for what you are." She met it without flinching. "Then they will have to do it while I stand." Soren hauled Yarrick and Pell to their knees, bound and coughing, while Mara emerged from the alcove with the twins safe against her chest. Lucian reached toward Valentina, tiny fist opening and closing in the smoke-lit air. Lyra watched Alistair with solemn, unblinking focus. By the time the moon crossed the roofline, Marcus Ravencrest was chained in Red Quarry's iron cell under triple guard, his forged writs seized, his living accomplices named, and his failed abduction entered into the neutral ledger in ink that could not be shouted away. By dawn, Red Quarry's neutral ledger had been copied twice, sealed once by the fort master and once by Mara under healer authority, then escorted under armed watch to High Cairn, where the Moon Tribunal could no longer pretend the cellar assault had been rumor. Marcus traveled in iron at the center of the column, wrists bound with moonsteel links, while Jarek Flint and Pell Dorn rode separately with their face wraps removed, and their names announced at each gate they crossed. On the second day of the climb, Valentina watched scribes compare the forged talon seal from Marcus's writ against the official Ravencrest matrix and mark the same angled flaw she had spotted in Red Quarry's torchlight. That tiny carving error, once a strange detail no one else seemed to notice, became the hinge of the case. High Cairn's tribunal ring stood cut into black stone, open to sky and pack witness. Alphas filled the tiers in formal leathers, some with shame in their scent, some with calculation, none able to look away. The mountain alpha who had sent polite regret sat rigid in the third row. The river chief who had requested less volatility would not meet Valentina's eyes. Below them, the fort master read the neutral record aloud, voice shaking only once when he reached the line naming the explosive satchel recovered from Marcus's belt. Mara presented the intercepted decrees, the soapstone signet mold, the witness vellum from the dead clerk's hand, the seized broadside slanders, and the custody chain from registrar chest to gray hollow vault. Every collected item was entered, examined, and accepted into tribunal record before the first challenge could be raised. Alistair stood at Valentina's right in crown black, no longer hiding behind a captain's plain insignia. His forearm glyph was uncovered. Soren stood left with 6 gray hollow veterans and no expression at all. Lucian and Lyra were present by Valentina's choice, not in the center of confrontation, but with Mara inside a warded witness alcove 6 paces beyond the ring, where the old stone runes glowed silver at the twins' approach and held steady. Their raven marks shone faintly through ceremonial linen, visible to every pack that had called them disputed. Marcus demanded blood denial ritual and spat that she had manipulated scent lines. Valentina stepped into the central circle before Alistair could offer the tunnels again. She cut her palm, pressed blood to Lucian's mark, then Lyra's, then to the tribunal stone itself. By blood moon right and moon witness, I demand truth sent from every alpha who speaks judgment, she said, voice carrying into the upper tiers. Any lie spoken in this ring will be named by breath and blood. The ring answered. Silver lines raced through carved channels underfoot. Marcus raised his arm toward the archers posted at the outer rail. Loose, he ordered. The arrows flew. Valentina lifted her hand. A lunar shield unfolded in a clean arc around the ring, and every shaft that struck it dissolved to silver ash before touching stone. Gasps rippled through the tiers. No one mistook her for a pawn again. Marcus shifted with a roar, war form tearing through his formal cloak as he lunged for the dais. Alistair met him in mid-charge, claw and steel and impact under full witness. Their duel was quick, brutal, and clear enough for judgment. Marcus cut to kill from blind angles. Alistair fought for disarm and control. When Marcus snarled, "She was always bait," Valentina moved first, seized the moonsteel spear from the ceremonial rack, and drove it through his shoulder into the tribunal post. "No," she said, breath hard and unwavering. "I am the line you failed to break." Pinned and forced back to human form by law and iron, Marcus was offered one final confession. He laughed bloodlessly and answered, "Mercy is weakness." Alistair's voice did not rise. "Then witness strength." The lawful stroke at tribunal stone was swift, formal, and witnessed by every seated pack. When it ended, the usurpation ended with it. The roar of the assembly came late, as if people had to relearn how to breathe before they could speak. Valentina did not hear most of it. She heard Lucian call her name from the alcove, Lyra's laugh answering him, and Alistair's breathing as he turned toward her, with battle still in his eyes and devotion breaking through it. The inner sanctum beneath High Cairn was quiet after the ring, lit by low braziers and moonlight falling through a narrow shaft of crystal. The twins slept in the next chamber with Mara and two sworn guards at the door. Their marks still glimmered in sleep. Valentina stood by the stone basin washing tribunal dust and dried blood from her hands when Alistair entered and stopped a respectful distance away. "I want this," he said, voice roughened by restraint. "But I will not take one step you do not choose." She turned fully toward him. Her body still trembled from power use and grief and relief braided together, yet the crux inside her had become simple at last. She could honor the dead and still choose the living. She crossed the space between them and put her palm to his chest over his heartbeat. "I choose," she said. "Ask me." His eyes held hers, amber deepening. "May I touch you?" "Yes." He lifted her braid away from her neck with careful hands, paused at the juncture of shoulder and throat, and waited until she nodded. The bite was sharp enough to pull a cry from her, pain bright and immediate, then transforming almost at once into a spreading heat that unknotted years of vigilance behind her ribs. Gold and silver threads rose over their skin where his mouth sealed the mark, visible bond light spiraling down his arms and across her collarbone like living script. She felt him through it, not as command, but as presence. His old guilt, his disciplined tenderness, his fierce awe that she had stood in the ring and chosen him after everything. "Mine," he whispered against her pulse, then drew back before instinct could overrun consent. "Only if you still say yes." She was already moving. She cupped his jaw, turned him, and bared the side of his throat where his pulse hammered hard. "My turn," she murmured, and he nodded once, eyes never leaving hers. Her bite landed over his claim line, deliberate and reciprocal. He shuddered but did not pull away. Pain flickered, then melted into a deep grounding current that settled low and sure, as if the bond had finally found its true shape, because neither had yielded and neither had dominated. Energy surged, then steadied. In the next room, both twins stirred at the same instant and their marks flared, then calmed, synchronized to the new rhythm. "Yours," she whispered, tasting salt and moonlight on his skin. "Mate," he answered, forehead to hers. They stayed like that for a long time, not speaking, just breathing each other in while the bond settled from wildfire into hearthfire. He wrapped his cloak around both of them and sat with her on the low step by the basin, her back against his chest, his hand covering hers where their marks throbbed warm and clean. When tremors took her, he held without tightening. When he began to shake, she threaded her fingers through his and held him through that too. "No more hiding," he said into her hair. "No more running," she replied. At sunrise, they walked into High Cairn's great hall together for the public claiming and coronation. Alphas who had withheld support were required to answer under the truth-sent lines Valentina had invoked. 2 admitted they had stood down from fear, 1 admitted Marcus had threatened trade routes, and all 3 signed reparations for widows displaced by the forged war decrees. Jarek Flint and Pell Dorn gave full confessions in exchange for life imprisonment under mountain labor law. The 2 council elders whose counterseals appeared on Marcus's papers were stripped of rank and exiled beyond charter roads. The clerk whose handprint had survived on vellum was named in memorial, and his family received protected status by unanimous vote. Valentina was invested as Blood Moon Luna Queen beside Alistair, not behind him, with co-rule clauses carved into the stone charter while she watched. Lucian and Lyra were entered into succession law as protected royal heirs, their raven marks reclassified from omen to unification sigil. Soren was appointed commander of the reformed tribunal guard. Mara accepted the post of sanctuary warden and took charge of the new refuge houses built first at Grey Hollow and Red Quarry for widows, orphaned pups, and rejected wolves. A messenger was sent to Iron Pine's low farms with sealed protection writs for Marta and any who had aided Valentina's flight. By nightfall, a reply came back in Marta's uneven hand, saying she would come before winter and bring bread. That evening, 4 places were set in the royal den above the training court. 2 large chairs and 2 small carved stools dragged close between them because Lucian refused distance, and Lyra insisted on climbing anything that looked ceremonial. Outside, wolves ran moonlit patrol over borders restored to their rightful lines. Inside, Valentina fed her children with Alistair at her shoulder, both of them marked, both of them chosen, while the hearth cracked softly, and the bond between them held steady as law.